Hey everyone, welcome. Today, we are diving into a really fascinating topic. Because listen, we aren't just talking about buying a glass box and throwing some colorful fish in it. We are talking about architecting a complex, living machine. If you've ever stared at one of those stunning custom reef aquariums in a home or an office and just wondered, how on earth do they pull that off? Well, we are going to break down the exact blueprint required to do it right. Today's explainer draws from expert insights on planning a custom setup to ensure it becomes a striking focal point rather than, a stressful disaster.
So right off the bat, notice the stark contrast in mindsets before the build even begins. The classic rookie mindset, they just buy livestock, drop it in the water, and treat the tank like a set-and-forget piece of furniture. But honestly, this rushing approach is disastrous. Rushing straight to the livestock almost always leads to completely avoidable stress and ultimately losses for your sensitive corals and fish. The expert mindset, on the other hand, is totally different. They know that before a single drop of water goes into that tank, you have to plan for stability. You need a crystal clear design for your equipment, your water quality, and your long-term maintenance. You are building the ecosystem first.
To get us up to that expert level, here is our architectural blueprint for today. 1. The core rule of stability. 2. Foundation, space, and layout. 3. Designing life support systems. 4. Cycling and smart stocking. And finally, number 5, creating a low-drama maintenance workflow. Let's jump right in.
Starting off with Section 1, the core rule. This is all about stability, which is the absolute bedrock of a thriving reef. The crucial thing you have to understand is that a reef tank doesn't just survive, it thrives on consistency. It's a simple concept, but incredibly demanding in practice, because every single decision we make serves one singular goal. We are targeting incredibly tight ranges for invisible elements. We're talking temperature, salinity, alkalinity, calcium, nutrients, and lighting. Your entire plan has to make hitting those exact targets achievable, day in and day out. Because if these parameters start swinging wildly, the whole system collapses. That brings us perfectly to Section 2, Foundation, Space, and Layout. This is where we map out your physical constraints before you buy any gear at all.
Before you build, you really need to define your practical goals. Are you going for soft corals, large polyp-stony corals, small polyp-stony corals, or maybe a vibrant mixed reef display? How visible do you want it to be? Once you lock that down, you have to map the physical environment. That means evaluating the footprint for the tank and the stand, checking the clearance for maintenance, and figuring out access to power outlets and plumbing. But don't overlook this next part, office dynamics. If this setup is going into a workspace, you absolutely must account for foot traffic, daylight exposure, and how the noise or heat from the aquarium's equipment might disrupt the office. It's a huge factor.
Now, when you're mapping your space, there is a fascinating, almost counterintuitive rule in reef keeping. Bigger is actually more forgiving. You might naturally assume a tiny tank is easier for a beginner, right? But the reality is that larger water volumes naturally dilute chemical swings. When you have way more water, a tiny mistake in your chemistry or a slight spike in nutrients doesn't immediately become lethal. It buffers the system, it helps maintain that long-term stability we just talked about, which frankly makes your job a whole lot easier. So even with custom tanks built for specific viewing angles, prioritizing stable support and larger water volumes is a massive key to success.
So you're probably wondering, how do we get more water volume without needing a massive, obtrusive glass box taking up the entire room? Enter the sump. A sump is a modular secondary tank, usually hidden completely away beneath the main display stand. This thing is the ultimate secret weapon for custom builds. Not only does it increase your overall water volume, again making the system much more forgiving, but it literally hides all your unsightly equipment and massively boosts your filtration capacity. It's what keeps the main display looking like a pristine, magical slice of the ocean.
Moving right along to Section 3, Designing Life Support Systems. We are officially heading down into the engine room to talk mechanics and chemistry.
You see, reef systems depend on so much more than just a basic filter you'd slap on a goldfish bowl. To process waste and keep the water absolutely pristine, you need a highly tailored blend of 3 distinct filtration strategies. First, biological filtration, which relies on beneficial bacteria to literally break down invisible toxins. Then mechanical filtration, which physically traps and removes particulates from the water to keep it crystal clear. And finally, chemical filtration, which handles things like carbon or phosphate management. Your custom design has to integrate all 3 of these engines based on what your specific tank needs.
And beyond just filtering the water, we have to engineer how it moves. It's so vital to remember that corals are living animals. They rely heavily on water flow for gas exchange, for feeding, and just for their overall health. But they absolutely do not want a single, harsh, blasting current hitting them directly. Your circulation pumps have to be planned out to mimic the natural, varied, chaotic motion of a real ocean reef. That's what keeps the environment dynamic and the corals happy.
To keep all this chemistry stable, you need eyes on the system. Early monitoring is exactly what prevents what experts call a slow drift in water chemistry. And experts really stress a critical point here. Reliable monitoring catches dangerous, slow chemical drifts before they turn into visible disasters. So you need essential, high-quality equipment right from day one. Specifically, a reliable heater, continuous temperature monitoring, and accurate salinity measurement. Because if these slowly drift out of range over a few weeks, the problem can be incredibly hard to notice until the corals just start dying.
We also can't forget about the sun and the supplements. Lighting is one of the absolute biggest drivers of coral health, especially for those higher demand species. Your lighting choice has to reflect the exact types of corals you plan to keep. And when you size your lighting, you've got to account for the tank's depth, the height of your rockwork, and how much light actually penetrates to the different zones of the tank. Furthermore, as your hard corals grow, they actively consume elements from the water. That's where manual or automated dosing of calcium and alkalinity comes in. But a quick warning, dosing introduces major risks if it's mishandled. You need a clear testing routine, safe calibration procedures, and crucially, backup thinking for power outages or equipment failures. All right, let's shift gears from all that mechanical plumbing over to biology in Section 4, Cycling and Smart Stocking. I like to call this the timeline of life.
Patience is literally everything here. If you just dump all your fish and corals in at once, the sudden bioload changes will completely destabilize nutrient levels and just massively stress the system, even if you have the most expensive, world-class equipment money can buy. We have to follow a strict timeline. Phase 1 is establishing biological stability, which is a process known as cycling. Only after that is rock solid do we move to Phase 2, adding the hardier organisms. And finally, using a very measured pace, we reach Phase 3, where we slowly introduce those highly sensitive corals and fish. That measured pace is exactly what protects the stability we worked so hard to build.
A quick but super important note specifically for office setups. You really need to prioritize hardy species with resilient temperaments and known compatibility. Why? Because you want the routine care to remain realistic for whoever is actually managing the tank. Selecting resilient, agreeable species ensures that this stunning piece of living art remains a joy and a real benefit for the staff, rather than becoming a stressful, time-consuming burden where you're constantly replacing delicate fish.
Which perfectly tees up our final section, number 5, low-drama maintenance workflow. This is all about the human operator. That's you, running the living machine.
A custom reef aquarium is only truly low drama when its maintenance schedule is rock solid and completely dependable. You have to build a schedule for water changes, filter upkeep, and cleaning surfaces, all without disrupting the system. But you also have to plan the logistics behind it. Where exactly are you doing your salt mixing? Where are your tool storage containers going? How are you safely managing the top-off water to replace evaporation? Clear, logistical procedures for these really basic tasks drastically reduce careless errors. And this is especially critical in an office environment where you might have multiple people interacting with or just working near the tank.
Let's wrap up with a final checklist to see how this all builds into the ultimate daily workflow for a successful reef architect. Step 1, test routinely. Confirm your temperature, salinity, and key parameters before small issues escalate, especially in those early months. Step 2, keep records. Track the changes so you can learn exactly how your unique tank responds over time. Step 3, use redundancy. Seriously, consider backup monitoring and have a solid plan for power disruptions. And Step 4, start slowly. Always add your livestock in stages to protect your stability. Committing to this simple 4-step workflow is exactly how you keep a custom system thriving for the long run.
So after seeing the exact blueprint required to properly right-size a system, design the filtration, plan the lighting, and commit to a rock-solid workflow, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Are you ready to architect a thriving, living ecosystem? Or are you just looking to buy a decoration? Because when you put in the meticulous planning we just covered, you literally get to bring a true, breathing piece of the wild ocean indoors. Yep, it takes work, but the result is an absolute masterpiece. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.